Hello and welcome to the Collapse Experiment. So, my simple life. Seems to be a lot of questions after some recent videos regarding Gen X and the workplace and why we don't want to work anymore. So, I was born in '79. And there's some question as to whether the cutoff for Gen X was 80 or 85, and I am not an expert, so all I know is I fit into that category one way or another. And as Gen X, we had a different experience from previous generations and the ones after us, because we were the latchkey kids with boomer parents, where in the 70s, mom had to go to work because, I don't know, half of the population decided they didn't want to be stay-at-home moms anymore. So the more often they went out to get their extra money, not for the family, but for themselves, because somehow that's how marriage works these days. The more women that did that, the more it depleted the workforce, meaning that men could no longer make as much as they were before because there was more available hands out there for people to hire. So next thing you know, the workforce is doubled. Kids are carrying their house key home because nobody is home when they get out of school. Then came the milk carton. The missing kid on the milk carton, which apparently there was only a few. It wasn't like a regular thing of like every milk carton had like some other missing kid from God knows where. It started with one kid. There was a couple of them after that. But thanks to the news media and psychopaths. Thanks to the media and psychopaths, some might argue it's the same thing. All of a sudden, parents are stricken with fear. The whole notion of kids roaming around on their bicycles, getting into adventures. The whole Goonies thing. The Stranger Things. Those kids on Stranger Things, that wasn't their reality. Those kids have no idea what it is that they were trying to act out on that show. Yeah, I'll come over to your place. Yeah, sure. I'll ride my bike over. Mom, I'm leaving. Wasn't a thing, especially in the 90s. As for our lack of trust for Gen X, why should we trust anything? What did we see during our time? Well, early on, there was Iran-Contra. You know, that was just kind of like for the older generations, minds were blown. But for us, it was just kind of like, is this a normal thing? Is this something governments always do? And then the 90s happened, and oh my God. Ruby Ridge. We got to watch Ruby Ridge on TV. Meanwhile, even as a kid, we're watching and we're like, why are they bringing tanks up to this cabin in the middle of nowhere? This doesn't make any sense. So we had Ruby Ridge, and then a couple years later, we had Waco. That was when people really started to wake up. What the is going on over there? And the news is talking about kids were being molested and all this other stuff. And the really smart people were like, since when does the ATF investigate like local crimes? Oh, no, they were there for gun stuff. So why didn't they just come and ask to see the guns? Oh no, they instead were like, yeah, this needs to end now. Just set it on fire. Not funny. So yeah, a bunch of kids died. Everybody watched that live on TV. And nobody was really on the side of the government with that one. Nobody I knew. Oh, but he was doing stuff with the... Nope. Even local law enforcement was like, yeah, we got some complaints and we investigated and there wasn't any laws broken. Huh. So then what happened after Waco? Oh yeah, the Oklahoma City bombing. Yeah, keep in mind, like we just had the 30th anniversary of the Oklahoma City bombing. I have yet to see anything on YouTube or anywhere else regarding that fact. Like, 30 years. Well, guess that shit's forgotten. But no, that bomb goes off. What, 2-3 days later, they announce, oh, we have the suspect. We know who did it. And it was a Gulf War veteran, a hero of the war, somebody who received a Bronze Star, was basically involved in just about every land-based military action that happened during the entire 100 hours of that war. Timothy McVeigh. And this guy, selected for Special Forces after being deployed over in Iraq, was his unit was also assigned to be the personal bodyguards of General Norman Schwarzkopf. This guy in particular, somehow decides that he's going to boom a federal building. Now, there was a lot of stuff that came out during the trial and afterwards, and man, is there some doozy of information out there regarding this Timothy McVeigh and his accomplices. But no, he was the lone boomer, right? Oh no, it was just him, according to the federal court case. It was just him. Oh, and Terry Nichols. Oh, and Michael Fortier. And then there just happened to be a former CIA operative who was running drugs out of Mena, Arkansas during the Clinton governorship over there. And was running guns to Cuban nationals in Florida. I don't know. That guy, he had a lot of sketchy things in his past. Yeah, McVeigh's just hanging out with that dude. He's also hanging out with neo-Nazis, white supremacists. Yeah, this guy was getting around everywhere. Around the same time that the FBI had this program going on, led by a guy named Larry Potts, called PatCon, or Patriot Conspiracy was the long version of the name. For some reason, McVeigh dropped out of the military the same time that PatCon became a thing. And every time PatCon was investigating certain things, Timothy McVeigh seemed to be doing those certain things, like sneaking on the military bases and seeing how easy it was to steal things like explosives. Kind of weird, right? How does all of this coincide? So yeah, we're watching all of this on TV, and McVeigh, of course, is the bad guy at first. Still is. Because after all, they just kept talking about the kids in the building. If you're really concerned about the kids in the building, maybe you shouldn't be blowing up your employees' kids. After all, it was McVeigh during an interview that said, once the people realize what it is that the government is doing, that changes the whole story. So yeah, Gulf War veteran, war hero, blows up a building. 30 years later, us, Gen X, are still looking at that going, sounds like a bunch of bullshit to me. If you really, really want to understand Gen X, you really want to figure out our mindset, watch the first 7 seasons of the X-Files. Anything after that isn't worth dealing with. No, you watch the first 7 seasons, you close it out when Mulder becomes an X-File himself, and that sums up the mentality of Gen X. Trust no one. There's always some dude smoking a cigarette, creeping around, trying to get you. There's monsters lurking around every corner. Doesn't matter how far ahead you get, somebody's gonna drag you back. No, that TV show sums up the mentality of that entire decade, of that entire generation growing up watching that show. And of course, there was stuff in certain articles that I've read recently where they're like, well, you had these movies and you had this music, and it's like, you clearly don't understand what it is that made those movies and that music. It was what Gen X was going through at that time. It wasn't that those things were feeding into the lives of Gen X and putting people into those situations. Cause and effect. The cause. What are we living through? The effect. The movies and the music. That's why everybody could connect with it. Everybody was going through it. The lack of trust. The knowing there's a good possibility things are not going to be okay. There was a lot of people. Now, I don't know about public schools, but I heard this from several other people, although the school I went to is totally different. The school I went to said Social Security will not be around by the time you retire. Of course, they're also telling us that our life expectancy was expected to be like 120 years due to the rate of technology. Which kind of sucks, because that means that if we live to be 120, half of our life, when we're supposed to be retired, we're not even able to collect Social Security. How much money does it cost to live another 60 years, but you're too old to work? Is there a stipend for just being super old? Does the Guinness Book of World Records start paying you to see if you're going to break the record? So, Gen X, we went through a lot. And hell, it was only a year after I graduated from high school when Columbine happened. Again, more questions than answers on that one. And then, 2 years later, 9/11. And no, jet fuel does not melt steel beams. If you lived through the 90s, you were well trained to question 9/11. The whole notion that they were just going to come out with an official narrative, like they knew the very next day, they were talking about it the day of. Oh, this looks like the work of Osama bin Laden. Already naming suspects. Day 2. Oh, it was him. Really? Because there was no admission from guilt from Al-Qaeda. What, day 3, day 4, they're already drawing up plans to go into Iraq? The Bush administration. That was me in my 20s. Lack of trust. A former coke addict, alcoholic, in the White House, sending my generation to war. You guys have a lack of trust. Have you been paying attention? This is all the stuff throughout the 90s is what I witnessed while going through school. Some of that, I wasn't even in high school yet. And then all of a sudden we reach adulthood. And a lot of guys, because the economy went to shit after the dot-com bubble, right? Stock market took a dump. Bush is in office. Jobs are getting cut. Hey, if you want a paycheck, you can always join the army. Next thing you know, you're doing 2-3 tours in Iraq or Afghanistan, one or the other. And then you get home and realize you're probably protecting the opium fields that are getting everybody high and killing everyone in your hometown because everyone's addicted to opiates. There's a lack of trust. Hells yes, there's a lack of trust. And if anybody was smart, you would definitely limit the number of people that you trust to a very, very small number. Because if there is one thing that we learned, for one, the government, well, you definitely don't trust them sons of bitches, regardless of who's in office. Case in point, we had 8 years of Reagan, 4 years, well, technically 12 years of George W.H. Bush, right? He was vice president under Reagan. Then he becomes the president. He starts negotiating NAFTA. Want to know where all the jobs went in the early 2000s and why everybody had to join the army in order to get a paycheck and go over and fight in Iraq and Afghanistan and NAFTA. So here's this plan, this free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. Ross Perot's on TV talking about how all the jobs in the U.S. are going to be sucked out, some of them into Canada, right? Because Canada is going to absorb some of the U.S. jobs, but then a lot of them are going to be moved down into Mexico because it's super cheap. And why wouldn't you operate in Mexico when you don't have to provide health care? It's a third to a quarter of the cost in order to pay these people to do the same work that American labor was doing. And then once those jobs are in Mexico, there's nothing keeping them from getting shipped over to China. So we vote in an election, 1992, Bush loses and Clinton wins. Now, if the American people had solely voted on making sure NAFTA doesn't happen and getting Bush out of office, well, joke was on them because Clinton went ahead and signed it in anyways, as if it was also a Democrat talking point. Do you understand why we don't trust anyone? It didn't even matter who you voted in to keep your jobs in the U.S. Clinton fucking signed it in too. No difference between Bush and Obama, and they're out in public these days, shaking hands, laughing, joking, like nothing ever happened. Because there's no difference between the two. Obama exported, shipped out, however you want to say it, all the illegals, more illegals than Bush did. At least Bush spoke Spanish. The exporter in chief was Obama. Everybody looks at him as if he was like the Democratic savior. Made healthcare more expensive, raised taxes. Oh yeah. This is everything that Gen X has witnessed since the late 80s, since the 90s, the early 2000s, everything that we have lived through. And then these younger generations are coming up. They missed out on the 90s. The 90s, if you wanted to kill trust in anything, live through the 90s. Because every time we turned around, every year or two, something was happening that totally killed trust in our system, our society, our democracy, our government. Oh yeah, that is what they missed out on. Then of course they're getting taught that 9/11, you got to worry about those hoaxers. They don't know what they're talking about. No, there's no conspiracy. No, that was Al-Qaeda. But weren't like 17 of the 19 hijackers Saudis? No, that was Al-Qaeda. We don't talk about the Saudis. 93% of the world's opium came out of Afghanistan during the war. That had nothing to do with the opium epidemic in the United States. No, we had our own 7% little stash over here that's decimating the population. Bullshit. Assholes don't know how to do math. So yeah, there is a lack of trust. It's a healthy lack of trust. Worked great during the coup too. They say something, do the opposite. Gen X here. How did you respond to the coup? Because me, I wasn't trusting a damn thing that was coming out of their mouth. That was my life. That was what I grew up with. And no, I don't trust really anyone anymore. Haven't for a long time. And guess what? People continue to let you down. Jobs still continue to suck with no ladder to move up on. And I'm a straight white male, so no, I don't get to go to some local college and get some type of little check from the government. You make too much money. Okay. That was what I always heard. You make too much money to qualify for this. Can I just say I'm gay? Does that count? Is that a thing now? Everybody but the straight white dude. And guess what? Straight white dudes, we don't want a handout. We just want things to be fair. That's about it. If we don't get it, no one else should either. It's kind of the mentality with us. Now I understand why my tax dollars are going to help out other people and nobody wants to fuck out and help me out. Again, no trust. Because that is what we learned. That is what we were taught over the years. And they sure as hell don't like it when you pay attention or ask questions. Asking questions will get you killed. Ask Terrence Eakey. Keep on typing.